Hello, everybody, and welcome to North 100. I'm Serge. Joining me today, I have a Wheeler.
Ahoy.
And a Jer.
Hello.
A reminder that this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Let's start off with our opening segment, the best card that you're not playing. Up to date, Wheeler. You got some secret tech for us?
It's not so much secret, mostly because it's a pointed card. And it's not even just like a one-pointed card. It's something that I think it rings true for most people that have played this format as being something that they've had to worry about once or twice. But I think I'd like to breathe some new life into the card. It's called Tinker. Maybe you're familiar with it.
I'm very familiar with this card. Tinker.
Yeah, it's not bad, and I think it's actually quite, fantastic, frankly. For those of you that aren't familiar, Tinker is a blue sorcery, 2 and a blue. Additional cost to cast Tinker, you have to sack an artifact, and it has search your library for any artifact and put it into play. And I think that Tinker kind of has this identity of you just tinker for a Blightsteel Colossus and you call it a day, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's like old school Magic, right?
Yeah, exactly. You tinker for big dumb, kill them, or tinker for like a memory jar and go off. Which I'm still partial to those two things, more so the memory jar than the Colossus. But I've been jamming this card pretty frequently in decks that aren't looking to necessarily do that. Like I've really enjoyed this card in like Lantern Control or like Planeswalkery Academy stacks decks. Just being able to find whatever you need for any given scenario. Or most recently, I tried it in a no Lotus Eggs variant. That was kind of more all in on taking advantage of Cart Clan Ironworks. So trying to kind of play the role of closer to what like the modern deck or the old modern deck RIP used to do. And I found that Tinker, my points were kind of all over the place, but Tinker really, before I settled on the build, but Tinker really kind of proved itself as just being absurd. Like it honestly doesn't feel that bad tinkering for something as seemingly benign as like an Aether spell bomb.
Are you trying to advocate like fair Tinker here or something like that? You're like, play Tinker. I'm like, okay, Tinker is obviously really strong, but like outside of the other examples, give me, narrow down this use case here.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to make a really quick comparison to shake it from your mind. A lot of people think of Natural Order and Tinker being very comparable. I don't think that's a good way of looking at it. The cost increase on Natural Order as well as the resource increase kind of prices you into needing to find that game-winning card or that set up to win the game the next turn. Whereas Tinker is so much cheaper. Artifacts are so much just easier to come by in decks looking to dedicate themselves to that card type, as well as being in blue, you're bound to have other tools to re-buy your Tinker more frequently than a green deck would Eternal Witness. So what I'm saying is that shake the notion of you tinker and then it's over, or the game, like the game is over either way, and to look to use this card as more of a utility spell in a lot of artifact decks that also just has the option of, well, they don't have anything, I'm going to kill them.
There we go. Because at first I was like, I don't know why you're not just killing them at this point. But yeah, if you can, this is the best card you're not playing if you change the way you're playing it.
Colossus ain't what it used to be. Inkwell ain't what it used to be.
I've been tinkering for Golos a bunch recently.
Golos!
Yeah, like that's great, right? Like that's Tinker for Golos has a lot of similarities to like Tinker or Natural Order for Primeval Titan.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of, both of these are kind of absurd plays. Yeah. See?
See, I just remember Magic, what was it, 8 years ago when we used to tinker for Staff of Nin? You'd be like, how do I lose?
Or Mere Battlesphere.
Oh, yeah. I mean...
Oh, baby.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like if you need to tinker for Saffonin or tinker for like, I mean, I'd probably recommend Staff over Corsa Portal, but if you got it, like if that's what you're doing, tinker for like Coveted Jewel, Gilded Lotus.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Love it.
Perfect. All right. So before we go into our theme, I want to say a very quick thank you and goodbye to Alex. So some people may have noticed in the previous episode of North 100, we were down a co-host after almost 3 years. So the first ever recording of North 100 was the first episode of North 100 went live September 9th, 2017. So 3 years and almost 100 episodes, and Alex decided he just wasn't enjoying the podcast as much, and it wasn't necessarily the cleanest thing. We didn't have a proper departure on the previous episode. Alex wanted to take some time to organize his thoughts outside of the podcast. And so we want to say a massive thank you and goodbye. And obviously, Alex is still around. We're obviously still great friends. And if we get a chance to jam some games when, the world changes a little bit, we're looking forward to that. But thank you, Alex, so much for all the good times, all the really good times. All right, let's talk about our theme today. Today, we want to talk about 4-drops. And normally at this point, I throw to Jer, and I'm like, Jer, can you define the topic? What's a 4-drop?
Things that cost 4, Serge.
Very good. But I guess a more important way to look at the theme today is, why is 4 CMC so important in Highlander right now? What does 4 mean to your deck? And I want to start with Wheeler.
So I pitched this idea after kind of just like finding that how I've been changing certain decks, specifically stuff kind of relevant to my interests, combo, creature combo, whatever it may be. There's been more of a reliance on specific styles of cards that play into those particular strategies. We'll get into that more in depth later, but it felt like, oh, hey, there's sure a lot of 4-drops in my decks now. And then thinking about it for other decks too, it just stuck in my mind. So anytime I was building a deck, I was looking at like the impact of all the 4-drops that I was playing, or like my reliance on like, looking at them and being like, okay, these are all auto includes,
That's a lot of auto includes. Well, I have a question to throw to Jer. Jer, do you think this is a result of curves going up or curves compressing?
I think in general it's curves going down or compressing, and also people just realizing like where the critical turn is in the format and how to best take advantage of that. So I think there are two sort of things. There's decks that typically played cards that cost more than 4 and have now replaced them with cards that do like function in a similar role but cost less mana, aka 4. And decks that are now being punished by those other decks that used to go bigger and they used to be able to go under, and they're having to go a bit bigger to combat the like leanness of the bigger decks going smaller and still having them beat on power level.
How much of this can we blame on Ancient Tomb mana? I was just thinking.
Non-zero.
Yeah, not wrong. I mean, I imagine we'll get up to that once we get into. Well, medium decks are kind of a weird beast. You can call them aggro. I guess other is on the table. Maybe other is the way to put it.
So let's try and frame this within specific archetypes. Let's talk about, this is a great example. Let's talk about 4 CMC in an aggressive deck. And I love mono red as an example here. How many 4-drops is Burn playing and why? Because I remember we were talking about, tinkering into your Staff of Nin. I remember when Burn used to play 1 5-drop, and that 5-drop's name was Arc Slogger, and that was the finisher. And you're like, oh yeah, you hit to 5 and you just kill them, and it's GG, it's game over.
My God, it's been a long time since you've cast a Goblin Guide, hasn't it?
You can you can still Eldritch Evo into it, and it's fine. But
Yeah, that part's fine. Burn the amount of four drops in red specifically, like mono red aggro, is probably the biggest like player to player preference when it comes to piloting red. It can be Greg Van Horn of, who those at home might be familiar from past top Highlander year end kind of top 8, top 16 tournaments, tends to, at least the last time that we've played, obviously there's been a big gap, um, loves a good Hazaret.
and the Fiery Confluence.
Oh yeah, and you gotta sleeve up a Confluence. I think Confluence is the like everybody is kind of every red player agrees like you gotta have Confluence, and a lot of them also agree with Hazaret. But Greg has also popped up with copies of cards like Chandra Torch of Defiance, the Kaladesh Chandra.
Let's talk about what Hazaret is and what the Confluence is, just in case people aren't familiar with them.
Oh, mama. So Fiery Confluence is a 4-mana sorcery, 2 red. It has choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. The 3 modes are destroy an artifact, deals 1 damage to each creature, and 2 damage to each opponent. This could mean it's 4 mana, deals 6 to your opponent that doesn't target. That seems pretty good.
Frequently, yes.
Yeah, could be 4 mana, blow up 3 artifacts from a combo deck. It's can even like Wrath like you could even do 1 damage to token creatures, let your prowess stuff and your bigger things survive 4 to the dome and then clear the way. The card is just for a card that just is usually take 6. It is wildly flexible in what it does.
This is the one deck that really didn't suffer from when the burn spells got reformatted and the Planeswalker redirection rule changed, because this card used to be ubiquitous in basically every red mid-range control aggro deck before when the rule was in its previous iteration. But once it changed, a lot of decks stopped playing it. But because the aggressive red deck has the like very excellent default mode of take 6, it still gets to play it.
And what is Hazaret?
Hazaret's 3 in a red for a 5/4 indestructible creature with haste, and it can only attack or block if you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, and you can pay 2 in a red and discard a card to deal 2 damage to each opponent.
Also doesn't target, which is pretty interesting there. So we have these as separate topics, but if you're in this low to the ground, very aggressive red deck, burn deck, how many 4-drops are you putting into it? Like, is that it? You're playing 98 cards in these 2 4-drops? Like, why are they playing these 4-drops? What role do they do? And let's make sure that when we're talking about 4 and aggro, we understand why and what it's doing here.
I really think it just boils down to like it's just so based on the player and how individual red pilots how they like to sling their spells. There is an absolutely noticeable difference in like the tempo play of different red pilots in different communities locally, whatever it may be. I personally, I love Fiery Confluence, and that's where it stops. I don't even play Hazaret.
Whereas like whenever I play the deck, I play Hazaret and Fiery Confluence, but nothing else makes the cut.
Is it a matter of mana efficiency, or is it needing a finisher? Because if you're looking mathematically at a 100-card deck, you're not going to see this for your 4-drop every game, right? Like a red deck ends pretty quick. You either win fast or you lose fast. And you're not actually playing enough density of 4-drops to really have that matter in your average game, right? So why these cards?
Well, that's the reason you can play 1 or 2 without getting punished very often, because the red deck is the leanest aggressive deck in the format. Like every other aggressive deck tends to go a little higher on the curve than the red deck, or every commonly played aggressive deck. Ben can talk to you about flying men later.
Yeah.
Because of the deck, people have figured out what's the best version of the deck, and it's like the very lean, like there was a time when people were playing Hellrider and Hero of Oxid Ridge, and like
Oh yeah.
those cards slowly fell by the wayside because once again the other decks were like, oh, we need things to block, so and they were cutting their mere battle spheres for, I don't know, something that they can actually cast in a game of Magic against mono red.
Timely reinforcements, right?
And so like it's sort of like a like tug of war basically, and it just like they eventually cut them.
Yeah, it's also like looking at the type of threats that red now plays. A lot of the time, I mean, you could just take like a snapshot of your average red deck wins variant, and a lot of the creatures are going to overlap, and a lot of them can actually attack the board pretty well. Like they can, challenge the board in the sense of like they Ash Zealot having first strike means that, you know, a lot of the time you don't have to use a removal spell to get a grizzly bear out of the way.
Through, right?
Yeah, your Bone Crusher Giant, you know, before it's this 4/3, it also took out a dork. Your Earthshaker Kenra means that something can't block, whatever it may be. They're providing some kind of advantage that kind of asks your opponent, hey, do better. And that requires additional resources from the opponent. And when they're spending resources trying to do better and challenge whatever kind of aggressive threat you've already played and attacked with, then that's when you get to just fire some burn to the face or try to get them with a haymaker. So it opens up your opportunity to utilize your mana for a haymaker like Fiery Confluence or Hazoret, instead of, you know, as we had mentioned, falling back to stuff like Ball Lightning or Hellrider and that kind of stuff.
But I miss them and they're sweet.
Yeah, I miss them too.
So we've talked about a deck that has created an opportunity to not play a lot of 4-drops. And let's move then instead. We can come back to Edgar afterwards because I imagine the conversation is going to jump back and forth a bunch. Let's talk about 4 in combo, because I think this will help solidify our point on the importance of 4 CMC right now. Now, I'm going to start with Wheeler again. Why is 4 so important in combo?
Okay, so this came to me when I was thinking about when Ikoria was dropping, and I was kind of just looking at the cards that I wanted to add to eggs, that I wanted to, or to Academy combo, and I was kind of just thinking like, okay, well, Krark Clan Ironworks, you know, that's already in there, and then we're, you know, Whirlwind of Thought, the 4-mana enchantment that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you draw a card. Song of Creation, another 4-mana enchantment that says you can play an additional land on each of your turns. When you cast a spell, draw 2 cards. There's another line of text that says you discard your hand, but I've played with this card.
Yeah.
I play every single time I've played this card. I mean, this sounds like, well, yeah, if you play it, you're probably winning the game. So of course you don't ever discard your hand. I guess that's what I'm saying. You play it, you win the game. I've never discarded my hand with this card. And I was thinking about these cards being absurd, and like how, and like Fires of Invention, a card that has recently received a ban from Standard. And I kind of had this thought of like, there are so many engines at 4 now that like the role of your 4-drop in combo is now that's like your engine. That's just like if you slam this and then kill them right then and there, or you pay 4 and then pass. But a lot of the times you're just slamming this card that is providing such a massive amount of velocity towards killing them that like all of a sudden, if you lay out the converted mana cost of some of these decks, you know, you have a massive amount of 1s and 2s, 3s, you know, there's going to be a couple, and then there's just like a brick of 4-drops, something that you've never seen, but you didn't see it as much as you do now. Even cards like Urza, Lord High Artificer, right? It's just like 4 is where they seem to plant these engine cards, and I'm of the mind that the best combo decks that you can find are often engine cards. So like they're engine combos, or at least that's the type I prefer.
As opposed to like an AB combo, right?
Yeah, I mean AB, you're rarely going to find 4-drops involved. I guess
Sure.
sometimes you can, but yeah, it's that like, and it can extend to the creature combo decks too. Like creature combo was one of the big ones where I'm like, oh, I probably should not have 13 4-drops in my deck. But I'm going through them, and you're like, well, I'm going to have to play Luminous Broodmoth. That seems like a good card to have.
Have you cut Siege Rhino from Sandy yet?
I think so.
All right,
I'm
good.
fairly certain. But like, you're like, okay, I have to have this Broodmoth, and I guess Felidar Guardian lets me kill in this way. And then, well, Birthing Pod is a 4-drop, so I got to play that, and it just keeps going and going and going, and even looking to a bunch of tutors, right? Like X tutors. A lot of the combo pieces that you are finding, I mean, that's going to be a converted mana cost of 4 on the stack. It's yeah, it's a lot.
So I like to use mid-range as sort of like the litmus test. You know, you hold up a piece of white paper next to your color to get the balance right. You know, let's talk about mid-range as the normal or the vanilla and compare everything to it. So when you're talking about a good old aggressive curve, right? You're like, I can play a mana accelerator that can jump me to 3 or 4 to get ahead of turn, or I'm going to have the majority of my threats and win conditions at 4 as a mid-range deck, right? You're like, I accelerate, I maybe play a hate bear or ramp spell, I play something kind of threatening at 3, and then 4 is where I hope to, you know, really be aggressive. Maybe I have a 5 or 6 drop to finish the game, but that's the I make a creature and I turn it sideways and I kill you kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
Does that still ring true in our format, or is we talk about, you know, modern and legacy as, is this a turn 3 format? Is it a turn 4 format? Is that changing for Highlander in this conversation? I've asked like 6 questions.
I'm not sure the speed of the format is changing so much, but I think the like card quality to CMC ratio is going up. So like you're getting better cards on average for less mana as the years go by. Like I think we can all agree that in the past 2 years they've printed several cards that are very good for probably less mana than they should have been. So I think decks just like aren't forced to play their game-winning cards at 5 mana when you can play Oko at 3 mana. Like you don't have to play Tamiyo, the 5 mana Tamiyo that I love so much, when you can play Teferi for 3 mana, and it's.
I don't want to keep harkening back to old Magic here, but I remember to talk to Jer specifically, a control deck, your win cons used to be 6 drops, right? Your Consecrated Sphinxes and your Wormcoil engines. You know, you'd counter Wrath, slam a 6 drop. And so, like, is 5 the new 6? Is 4 the new 5? Are we just compressing decks tremendously here?
Yeah, like 4 is the new 6 now. Like, yeah, we're not playing Wormcoil engine. We're not playing Sun Titan or Frost Titan. We're playing, like Jace the Mind Sculptor is good enough to win now. Like, if you're playing cards that cost more than 4, they basically all have flash in control. Like you can still play 6 drops, they just have to have flash.
Like 5-drop Teferi is just like the big guns sort of thing.
Like,
and
wow, you're going all out.
Yeah, and that card is absolutely absurd and realistically only costs 3 mana. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Functionally for the decks, most of the decks you're playing it in, and that's like the bar for 5 drops that are sorcery speed, basically.
All right, so let's summarize our thesis and our theme here, and then we can use that to sort of look at various archetypes. So 4 is really important in Highlander right now because of basically recent design shifts is making the format not faster in that games are ending faster, but the power level is higher such that curves are compressing. I don't need to throw a question in there. I just need to make sure that we're all in agreement that that's the thesis.
Yes, I think it is important to note, though, specifically that when we talk about design shifts as well, that for fours, a lot of it has to do with like what kind of role they want 4 mana cards to play.
Excellent.
And so while cards will play different roles in different formats, their context is going to be everything. When they're designing a card and sending it out, they will say like, all right, questing beast, you're a 4-drop creature and you have a bajillion abilities and you'll look to push through that final couple points of damage. That's or kill a planeswalker that is going to come down on 3 or 4. That's what your job is, right? Yeah, it's like that's the role of like a 4-drop like aggressive creature in the design, or like a 4-drop enchantment. Your job here is to seemingly double your opponent's mana or cards in hand, and that's what we made you for.
Yeah, well, I noticed in your combo example, Ben, everything you're talking about is a new card: Song of Creation, Urza, which is pretty neat there.
Neat's one word.
Yeah. I to go back to the vanilla example, what does mid-range do now? If you want to play, I'm using heavy air quotes right now, you can't see it, but if you want to play Fair Magic, if you're playing, remember the old days like Bant Blade? You'd play some elves, you'd ramp into some aggressive creatures ahead of the board, you'd give them a piece of equipment, and then you'd get in the board. Like, that was a aggressive mid-range creature-based fair deck that was pretty competitive for a while.
When your nut draw is turn 2 Geist of Saint Draft into turn 3 Rafik.
Yeah.
I mean, still pretty good, but
Sublime Archangel. Anyone?
Yeah. And I mean, that's another great 4-drop, right? I mean, that might be the 4-drop finisher you see in aggro and maybe an aggressive mid-range deck is Geddon. Geddon or Ravages of War, right? Destroy all lands. It's symmetrical. It's fair.
But I think that the 4 mid-range, or even like whatever line is blurred with the blade variants and the medium variants of like, I'm looking to accelerate to this point ahead of curve and then kill you, it's that like cards like Armageddon and Ravages have lasting kind of like implications of when you cast them, right? And Sublime Archangel, I mean, this example might fall flat because if you kill a Sublime Archangel or you kill a questing beast, they're both just dead, right? But I think it's also just kind of asking yourself like, well, what happens if they don't kill it immediately? Like, what is this going to represent? And you're seeing this shift where, I mean, like Gideon Ally of Zendikar on 4, right? Or Palace Jailer or something like that. That hits the table, gets immediate advantage in the form of either making a token or exiling, and then has the secondary advantage of you have to deal with this or this card will single-handedly take over the game, either by being able to do this every turn or draw you a bajillion cards, whatever it may be. So like, I think there is still room for the like absolute elbow from the top ropes that is like a Ravages of War. And I don't think that's going to get pushed out by design or new cards anytime soon. But for everything else, like there will be like I had to cut Restoration Angel from a deck recently.
Yeah, I've been cutting that card as well.
It just feels so bad. Like how like convincing yourself to make that change is like it's hard
when your auto includes are no longer auto includes.
Well, it's just like locked in your head that like a couple of years ago, that's if I was like writing out a Jeskai deck or whatever, like I would be like, okay, well, let's start with the obvious includes, Snapcaster Mage, Restoration Angel, like that's Young Pyromancer or whatever. That's where you start. But now that's not now Resto is just like, I guess if I'm combo killing with it.
Now, an important question that when we were planning this episode we wanted to talk about is how many 4-drops is too many, and do you need to be going up higher in the curve? And let's talk about Jeskai. Let's talk about a mid-range deck that you've piloted a lot. We've talked about a lot. So Jeskai control, it kills stuff, it turns creatures sideways, it counters and burns and whatever. It's like a very, very, very flexible mid-range deck. Does it have anything over 4? And how many 4-drops is it running?
Are we counting Teferi 5 as a 5-drop or a 4-drop here?
Or a 3-drop? That's a 5-drop. We'll talk about the CMC.
It's a 5-drop.
Yeah.
As defined in the top right corner.
Force of Will, not a 5-drop.
Yeah.
All right, fair. Force of Will, honorary, free spell.
Teferi and Mystic Confluence.
Wait, hold on. Honorary free spell?
It's just a free spell, Serge.
All right, okay. Literal free spell.
Tell you what, Force of Will, I'll throw you a bone. We'll consider you a free spell.
It's not free. It costs you a spell. It costs you a card in hand, okay?
How much mana, Serge?
How much mana lifetime do you think you've paid for Force of Wills?
On average.
Probably 10.
Yeah, on average, 10 mana. 10 mana lifetime.
10 mana lifetime, probably. I think I've hard cast Force of Will maybe twice in my entire Magic career.
Oh,
man.
It feels good. You're like, hey, I have like 14 mana open
I'm easy
right now.
over 1,000, but...
Yeah, I mean, it's like
the average is like around 1, probably.
Hard casting Force of Will does feel really good.
This is a total aside, but it reminds me of a long-standing bet I had with Allison about how much she'd ever spend on Tasigur. And she's like, okay, if Tasigur ever costs more than a Goyf, I'll give you a toonie.
You're welcome.
It was like 18 months after that card came out. She just walked up to me one day and handed me a toonie. And I was like, and I immediately clued into it. I was like, it finally happened. And she's like, yeah, in my defense, I cast it 3 times that game or something like that.
Now to clarify, Allison has a very rare form of amnesia where she forgets Caracas exists, correct?
Yeah, I was your champion there, Serge.
Yeah. All right, I've massively derailed us. How many 4-drops in Jeskai? Let's frame Jeskai as a case study in this example.
How many 4s, or how often are we going above 5 or above 4?
Both.
You're playing like 2 5.
So there's 100
right?
cards in a deck. That's our starting point.
Okay, great.
So common wisdom, if I was making a mid-range deck and I was looking at a curve, I would guess, using old data, I was like, I can probably get away in a mid-range deck. I can get away with maybe 1 or 2 5s as a finisher. I'd expect to see, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 4-drops and then have a nice healthy curve building up to that. I'm just throwing out numbers, but that...
You have more 4s than 5 or 6, I think.
If we're talking Jeskai, like mid-range with the ability to pivot to potentially kind of like controlling the game a bit, like we're talking about evasive good threats with like Swords to Plowshares, Force of Will,
all killer, no filler.
Great. I'm probably just on like Glorybringer, Teferi 5, and Mystic Confluence, and I think that's it.
That's reasonable.
How many 4s? Yeah.
How many 4s? Palace Jailer, Cryptic Command, and then I imagine, I'm going to be on Mind Sculptor,
Gideon,
Chandra.
Yeah.
But like, I think that's it. Like
That's
Jailer,
5.
like I'll play Lightning Angel because I'm in.
Ben, are you admitting to have cut War Leader's Helix from Jeskai?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Right,
yeah. There's gonna be somebody in the comments section that's just like, "Oh, Ben's wow, I can't believe it. Ben threw us under the bus with War Leader's Helix literally like a year and a half ago," and it's just like, okay, well,
It was good at the
things
time.
change. Yeah, it was good. I mean, that's a a great part about Highlander. Although when I say that, it's it's a great thing that cards will shift. New cards come up. Old cards could become more relevant from new cards being printed. But if I had to choose between a world where I get to War Leader's Helix and Oko doesn't exist, or Oko existing and War Leader's Helix never being a legal or a worthwhile card to cast,
Yeah, that's fair.
like you can't even Helix an Oko.
So it's not as if 4 is bloating. right? Like that's about the same amount of 4s that I would have expected, 18 months ago or something like that. But I guess what has changed is the power level of those 4 drops.
Well, Jeskai also isn't a mid-range deck with mana dorks. I think that's an important thing to note, because if I'm like the lands mid-range decks, or if you're a mana dork mid-range deck, like your 4-drop slot is probably just packed to the brim, or your 3s and your 4s.
Well, I think
Right.
we have to talk about that in Highlander in general, because we as a format have access to all of the acceleration. Like every deck gets acceleration. Red deck wins can be playing a Moxen, an Ancient Tomb, and all these things. And I think we have to recognize the impact that the existence of those cards does to the curve and to the speed of the format, which is a big part of the pointing philosophy as well, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
All right, let's do another case study here, if we will. I'm going to throw to Jer here. Tell us about control. What does 4 CMC mean for control now? Actually, and bonus side question, how many 4 mana cost counterspells are you playing, and what is the importance of those ones?
1, because it's Cryptic Command.
Oh, you're not playing, what was the other one? It's like counterspell, draw a card?
Dismiss. Like, Dismiss has been a meme for like 4 years at least.
Oh, all right. I didn't know that was a meme card. I thought it was actually just good.
I mean, it was at one point, but I mean,
yeah.
I played Control on the most recent Canlander stream we did, the Magic Online one, and in that deck I had 9 4-drops, but 2 of them cycled for 1 mana, so I had like 7 actual 4-drops. I had 3 5-drops, and I had 2 actual 6-drops.
Huh.
With the more cycling cards you get in Control, the more you get to cheat. Because like I have 4 6-drops, but 2 of them cycle. I have 10 4-drops, or 9 4-drops, but 2 of them cycle. I have 4 5-drops, but 1 of them's Force of Will, so it doesn't count.
And a lot of those cycling cards are newer cards as well, and I guess it just offers you more flexibility as a control player.
Yeah, like Shark Typhoon is an amazing control card that technically on the when you sort by CMC on tapped out, it's a 6-drop, but it's X1 blue in reality. And Boon of the Wishgiver, once again, it's like late game if you need to draw 4 cards, like you're in tap out mode, you can draw 4 cards, but otherwise it's just like 1 colorless cycle.
So have you felt a change recently pushing you in that direction of 4, or is control sort of an exception to this conversation?
I mean, I play Control so much, I've been like adapting for what feels like forever, but there was definitely a time where like the 5 and 6-drop section of my deck list would be much fuller. Like we pointed out before, that like Consecrated Sphinx, Wormcoil Engine, Titans, clunkier Wraths, like
you're not going to find it in Inferno Titan.
Like there was a time I was playing like Phyrexian Rebirth in control decks.
All right, hold on, help me out there. Which one's Phyrexian Rebirth?
4 white.
Don't do it.
Destroy all creatures.
Oh, right.
And you get an XX for the 3 most powerful creatures or something.
Destroy all creatures, then create an XX colorless horror artifact creature token where X is the number of creatures destroyed this way.
All right, yeah.
6 mana Wrath. Oh, right. I guess we have to talk about your favorite, probably 4-drop of all time. What is it? Wrath of God?
Supreme Verdict. We're playing blue. Let's enough with the formalities here. And my second favorite Wrath, 4 mana Wrath, is Moat.
Oh, right. I mean, let's real talk here. I mean, 4 has always been powerful. We're talking about Geddon. We're talking about Moat, Wrath of God.
But the thing is, like, there's been some powerful cards, but now there's just like such a high density of them that it's every time you look at a 5 or a 6-drop, and trust me, I love 5 and 6-drops more than the average person. Like, Ben's been making fun of me for several
Big
years.
dumb 5-drops.
Yeah.
Hey, I like 6-drops. It's 5-drops that we're
Like I haven't mentioned the fourth 5-drop I played, which you'll no doubt remember is Voracious Great Shark.
Oh, I'm familiar.
Oh, you're playing the Great Shark?
It's
Yo,
so
I'm
sick.
so proud of you.
It's a 5-mana 5/4 flash that also counters a spell.
Yeah.
Now, the only downside to this whole conversation is a lot of my favorite land cards at 5 CMC don't have a 4 CMC better version printed yet. And that kind of makes me sad. Where's the 4 mana Maluko, right? Maloku. I always mispronounce it. Where's my 4 mana Obnixilis?
There's a 2-mana Maloku, Serge, and it's your favorite card. It's called Trade Routes.
Trade Routes is pretty good. Yeah, and it's redundancy, but like that archetype in particular hasn't quite seen the like there's no lands questing beast yet. You know what I mean?
I mean, you can just play Questing Beast.
Is Uro's like a 4-drop?
I guess
like
Uro's
a
kind of like
2-drop.
Yeah, Uro's you can't pinpoint exactly what it is, but you're just like, all right. I mean,
it's real good, is what it is.
Yeah.
Now we had a note in other here. Any other specific archetypes that we wanted to talk about and how it affected things, or was that just a catch-all in case?
I mean, I thought other was just kind of like the bridge gapper for versions of decks that kind of blur the lines, like the medium strategies and
Prison
even like some
stuff.
creature combos, prison decks. But like honestly, the medium decks, they used to be like, if you think about medium decks, right, it's Ancient Tomb, and then at the end of the day you're taking a giant dragon or like a Colonian Hydra comes crashing through, right? For 5. And while I think medium green is one of the few decks like this where you stay at 5, which is just kind of a product of the 5-drops that we've received in green recently. But like for medium red, I know that I am down to very few 5s. Like I'm on Reality Smasher, Glorybringer, and Thundermaw, and occasionally Luca as well. I will say that.
Oh yeah.
And like the only 6s I have are, one of them's actually a 2-drop, and funny enough, I count one of them as a 4-drop, which is Embercleave. And so
Cleave is such a good card.
Yeah, so like I found myself going more into 4s with this deck, especially as of recent. Like again, if we're counting Cleave in the 4s, which we should, the 4-drops that I'm on right now for medium red, half of them are from the past year or so. Like Everquill Phoenix and Fireflux Squad, 2 new additions from Ikoria that are absurd. Torbrand from Eldraine, pretty good card.
Quite good.
And then of course Embercleave, and this isn't even including.
Are you playing
like
Annex in medium red?
Yep.
Sorry, which one is Annex?
Annex is the red demigod, 1 red, star 3 legendary enchantment creature. Its power is equal to the devotion to red, and whenever Annex or another non-token creature I control dies, I make 1/1 satyrs. Can't block. If the creature's real big, 4 power or greater, I get 2 instead. So like I guess medium red's a good example of a deck where like it was so like the vision that you have in mind is, I'm taking a dragon to the face on turn 3. And like, yeah, you're still playing dragons, but like we have gone down from like
it's worse. Now it's like standard. You're taking Annex with Embercleave on turn 3.
Oh yeah. You just like, you have a bunch of goblins nipping at your heels, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And then a dragon comes by, and you're like, that's what I was worried about. And you kill the dragon, and then you're like, wait a minute, why am I still dead?
You're like, I'm still dead here. Yeah,
I'm still dead, and like Angie's Ravager or Anya's Ravager is like chewing at your neck. So
let's talk really quickly, maybe as a wrap up here, not just of 4 CMC, but turn 4. Because I think that's a big part here, because we can get ahead of it with Moxen, we can get ahead of it with a lot of the powerful acceleration we have, but we want to keep coming back to that number 4. Can we say Highlander is speeding up? Or, I mean, I don't think it's a turn 4 format you can expect to die, but is it pretty obvious to say that if you haven't done your game plan by turn 4, it's over? Has that shifted in the past couple of years because of design?
I think a little bit. Like, I think Highlander's always been like a reasonably fast format.
Oh yeah,
it's always been like close-ish to the speed of modern. I think is like a pretty reasonable like benchmark. Like the nut draws of Highlander decks tend to be a little faster, and the average draws probably tend to be a little slower.
I mean, the biggest flaw in Highlander is the inherent inconsistency because of 100-card singleton, and also part of the beauty of trying to make a coherent deck list out of a singleton format that is still aggressive and very fast. Like that's the sales pitch of the format to me, right?
And I don't think the critical turn has changed. Like I think it's always been mostly turn 4 for the most part. Like it's obviously different in certain matchups, and certain decks will do more stuff earlier on, but I think the critical turn is still around turn 4.
I think that you need to pay more attention to the 3s that are being developed, where like, you know, previously if they hit a 3 drop, like if they're playing what they play before their turn 4, like before you would take some damage, but you could maybe ignore it so that you could properly deal with what they have on turn 4. And then you recoup your losses and try to, you know, incrementally work your way back, or play a haymaker that invalidates what they've done before. But now, because the 3s are so good, or like what people are doing on turn 3 is so powerful and resilient, that it makes the 4s all that more important, because they are not only can they be the nail in the coffin, but they could also just be, I guess, a whole nother coffin. It's like you just have so much to deal with.
It's a 1-2 punch,
early.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Where like before you could maybe take the chip on the chin, and then you're like, well, now I'm going to deal with what I really need to worry about. But now you got to worry about everything.
So like an example, turn back and forth. If you're on the draw, your opponent plays a 3, you don't answer it, you hope to counter it turn 4, and then maybe settle something turn 5. But if you wait to have that removal spell for their turn 4, the turn 3 is just going to kill you. Like, I hope that adds clarity.
Well, and it's just like the game can just be over. Like against some decks, if you just play Oko on turn 3, like the game is just over. Against some decks, if you play 3 fairy on turn 3, the game is just over.
Yeah, War Sahili, I mean, we've had Goblin Rabble Master, but Legion War Boss, yes. The redundancy factor from other decks too.
And Krenko as well sort of fits that role.
Yeah, just like the chances of your opponent having a 3 that are critical for you to deal with efficiently have gone way up. But that's not as, I mean, that feels like kind of like an inevitability, like that was going to happen without any kind of like drastic shift in design, just because, I mean, that's something we had been seeing for years, right? Like so many decks had a massive 3-drop slot. But now, because of how the 4 drops like function with the same efficiency or raw power of, you know, previous 6s and 5s or whatever it may be, without as much of a commitment, it's just a lot. It's just so much to take all at once.
Well, and I think the design shift sort of just expedited the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was going to happen eventually, but it just sort of happened.
Yeah, you're eventually just going to get enough good cards, but
started happening all at once.
Totally,
for sure.
Totally. I don't know. I see this as being a positive thing personally. I love new powerful cards. I like playing with new things. I worry that there's a take in this, which is perhaps a little bit like everything's terrible. And I don't know. I think the format's getting better personally.
Well, better's a hard.
Sure, that's fair. Yeah. That's fair. I'm still enjoying Magic, I suppose, is a good way to add that. I really quickly, any closing thoughts on 4-drops? Anything that you wanted to get out in this episode before we start to wrap up?
Play them now. Eventually, there'll be 3-drops.
Oh.
Wheeler.
I think now is the time. I'll speak for combo primarily. Now's the time to kind of like shake off previous kind of builds of old decks, basically, because you're getting a whole bunch of new engines and resources at 4. So maybe, you don't need black and sandy B. You do something else with the same kind of shell, or eggs doesn't need white and salvagers, and you do something without white. That kind of stuff. It's a great time to experiment, is what I'm trying to say.
That's very cool. Excellent. All right. Well, then let's move on to our closing segment, Powerful Magic. Perfect. And up today, we have Jer. Jer, tell us a magic story.
All right. This is a story from the first Yellow Jacket Unified Highlander tournament.
Now, what is Unified Highlander, if people aren't familiar?
So Unified Highlander is where you play, you're on a 3-person team. You play against other 3-person teams. You play individual matches, and then whichever team wins 2 out of 3 matches wins the overall match.
And is there any deck building restrictions?
Yeah, Unified is that you can't share any cards between decks except for basic lands. It doesn't just let you figure out the best deck, and then you all just roll up with 3 versions of the best deck. And even more beyond that, you can't even share like fetch lands, dual lands. So it has some interesting deck building requirements. And so I rolled up with my classic team of Trenton and Stefan Bard. And we played the classic deck layout of Grixis High Tide, 5-color lands, and Big Red. Very, very common deck setup. I'm kidding. We're pretty sure we're the only team in the history of Unified Highlander to have
5-color lands is pretty ambitious in a format where people can't have any duplicates.
Yeah,
just gonna.
Yeah, and we were playing a match, and it was actually really interesting because I had lost, Stefan had won, and Trent was going to game 3, which was unusual because usually, if you know anything about High Tide and Stefan, they usually take a long time to win.
Subtle little dig there. I like it.
Oh, it's not subtle.
Yeah, there's no reason for it to be subtle.
I'm pretty sure Stefan's still the only person to ever go 0-0-4 at YJ. As an aside. So Trent's in his last game, and then he just looks over and he's like, should I keep? And in his hand, he has Thundermaw Hellkite, Stormbreath Dragon, Black Lotus, Mox Ruby, Ancient Tomb, and a Mountain, I think, was his hand. And the game was over on turn 2 because he was on the play turn 1. He went Thundermaw Hellkite off Lotus Ancient Tomb. And then his draw let him cast Stormbreath Dragon on turn 2, and it was the most ridiculous non-game of Magic ever.
I like it.
So ridiculous. Yeah.
So our episode about 4-drops, the Powerful Magic story, is having a 5-drop turn 1 and a 5-drop turn 2.
Yeah, I thought it was appropriate. Big stupid 5-drops always win. Moral of the story.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, friends. Well, that is going to be it for our episode today. Thank you very much for listening. Reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon, over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Goodbye, friends.
Bye.
Later.